is not an employment issue. Whistleblowing is a patient safety issue, not an employment issue. Whistleblowing is a anti-money laundering or anti-fraud issue because people speak up about things that they see are going wrong. They are the first line of defence against crime, corruption and cover-up. What happens next, we would expect as whistleblowers, is that an organisation would say, thank you for telling me, and go and act on it. And yet I suspect that this is a room which is somewhat of an abattoir for people's careers, where rather than their organisation listen to them, take action to rectify the wrongdoing, because a whistleblower isn't judge, jury, executioner, investigator and so on. They are somebody who is doing the right thing. We have looked at thousands of cases over the years, and I have yet to meet anybody who can tell me what the law says unless they've been through an employment tribunal. I recently spoke to the head of one of the regulators, and I said, well, you're in charge of whistleblowing, that's great. Tell me, what does the law say? And they went, well, it's doing the right thing. And I said, well, no, but you're head of whistleblowing. How do you recognise when somebody comes to see you that they are a whistleblower? And they and I said, go and Google it. But what we came to is that we have people in positions across all of our public services and across our private sector, none of whom know what this is. And the reason I'm not talking too much about whistleblowing is I know that other people on this panel are going to do so. So then I'm going to turn to good work that's being done in this building or in this whole place. We have a bill called the Office of the Whistleblower Bill. It's been called a few things over the years. Here's one I prepared earlier. I have a few copies. It is available on a website, but it sets out what we're seeking to achieve. And this is what whistleblowers want. This is not what I want or Whistleblowers UK want. This is what whistleblowers told us they want. They want to be protected when they speak up from retaliation. They want somebody to do something about it, to be investigated and action taken to prevent harm. They want people to be held accountable. Let's face it, that's all we've heard from the Post Office Horizon and the blood scandals and many others. Bill Kirkup, we want to hear in health people being held to account. And we want education, because nobody should not be able to explain what whistleblowing is. And my party trick is the law says it's a disclosure of information that in your reasonable belief tends to show that a crime has or might be happening. Same for a statutory obligation or duty, miscarriage of justice, damage to the environment, health and safety, or the destruction or hiding of evidence that is or might be happening of any of the above. And it's in the public interest. Now, how many people knew that? And how many people knew that they were only going to court for a detriment? To be able to prove causation. Let's use these words because they're in the law and nobody understands it until it's too late. But in this place, we're doing good work. There is a bill coming through, and we hope that with Dawn's support and many other brilliant MPs, but we need the government, it will go through at the same time as the Hillsborough Law. Now, the Hillsborough Law, this is all about candour. I'm not even getting onto rewards, but candour. Candour is important because the Hillsborough Law will ensure that people who work for the government, in effect, they're on the taxpayer's pound, will have to tell the truth. But I think that's a double-edged sword. We're placing yet more obligations on top of other ethical obligations that doctors, lawyers, bankers and so on already have. We're now saying you have to tell the truth. Well, they mostly have been, but nobody's been listening. So we would like an Office of the Whistleblower to ensure that that is the safety net for every citizen. It's the place where it will listen, it will record the information, it will track the patterns. We will never have another situation like Hillsborough, like the Post Office, like the situation we've got in midwifery and nursing, and all of the other public sectors. I think I'll wind up at that point for you, Dawn.
Yeah. I'm normally quite a strict chair, but
that was good. 6 minutes.
Yeah, in 6 minutes. Well, Lawrence said, it's quite relaxed, so I'm trying to be more relaxed. But thank you, it's very informative. Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Chris Day. Dr. Chris Day, over to you. Oh, he's got a timer as well. Brilliant. That's good.
I heard about it. Hello, my name is Dr. Chris Day. So I'm an NHS whistleblower. My whistleblowing case has been going on for 10 years, the litigation. It's about to go into its 11th year. And I want to put, in 5 minutes, I want to pull out a few things from my 10-year jungle of whistleblowing litigation to support this idea that the whistleblowing legislation in this country is failing and urgently needs to be changed. So I was an ICU doctor, so my whistleblowing case was all about an ICU in South East London in a reorganised trust. It was about serious staffing issues at night and about skill mix at night. And I say the failure to take note of those issues resulted in several avoidable deaths. My case is them essentially causing me detriment, trying to silence me and trying to confuse the issues. So that's what I would call the whistleblowing detriment case. And you'll hear this idea of whistleblowing detriment. But it's basically taking the doctor down, smearing them and covering everything up. And of course that's detrimental. But I think the issue here is not just detrimental to me, it's detrimental, well, at the very least, anyone in South East London that wants intensive care, which is potentially everybody. So it's very inclusive, these issues and how important they are. So let's consider the 10-year jungle of litigation that if anything is just hotting up. It's certainly not anywhere near finishing. So the first 4 years was spent undermining my employment worker status to effectively break whistleblowing law so my case could never be heard by a court. Now, as I mentioned, it's a very inclusive thing, this. So this was done not only to me, but to every doctor below consultant grade in the country, effectively, as the case progressed into the appeal courts, undermining their employment status. So the taxpayer funded, effectively, my employment status and that of 54,000 doctors being undermined just to stop my case being heard, and by default, every other whistleblowing case that might have been brought by a junior doctor. Now, sorting that out fell on my shoulders, not the government. The government didn't do anything. So I privately funded litigation over 4 years to defeat these ridiculous arguments in the Court of Appeal. And luckily, 5,000 crowdfunders joined me in that. But had they not, in a little employment tribunal in South East London, the nation's doctors would have lost whistleblowing protection, and nobody in government would have lifted a finger to do anything about that. And that's quite and I'm just warming up with what they tried to do to stop this thing from being heard. So we went along to the Court of Appeal over 4 years and defeated this argument. And the case finally got heard in 2018. Or did it? During my evidence, my legal team were threatened for costs, ordinary costs against me and my family, and also wasted costs against them. And that is a liability felt by a small law firm and potentially a barrister. So those threats were not done in advance properly by letter. They were done on the cuff when I was under oath, so couldn't have frank discussions with my lawyers. And I think anyone who knows the story thinks it caused a mess. I think that's a very diplomatic way of me putting it. But it resulted in a settlement agreement and none of the cases being heard. And that's after 5 years of litigation, nearly $500,000 of public money, with a similar amount from my crowdfunders. And it ended in a settlement agreement and all the issues being buried. Or did it? In some ways, the world of employment law and whistleblowing law succeeded in crushing me, covering the issues up, and stopping the case being heard. Now, no offence, Lawrence.
No.
The employment lawyers amongst you are probably thinking, what's the problem? We did our job. We crushed the whistleblower, we stopped the case being heard, and we got rid of all the bad news. And And it was a bargain. It was £500,000. And we know that there might be some truth in that, but there's not much, is there? We don't want that to happen. And the reason it did happen is because we use and rely on the Public Interest Disclosure Act in this country. But the story, I don't want to get too depressing. That wasn't the end of it, because the NHS wanted to parade their crushing of the whistleblower with some public statements saying that they didn't threaten me for costs, because everyone was wondering why I would suddenly throw in the towel. And that waived a special privilege, which meant that I could speak freely about what led me to settle. And now that was not the plan. And the NHS managers involved need to go on a course about without prejudice privilege. And so it came back to court in 2022. And I think this is even more simple. It was, I say the NHS lied to the press and MPs, denying cost threats and saying my case wasn't about an intensive care unit, which is ridiculous, but they said it. And they lied about certain investigations. Now, that is a very winnable, simple thing to bring to an employment tribunal that you would hope that even they could cope with. And then during that hearing, and I kid you not, and this is all reported in the press, we put so much pressure on the NHS organisation by bringing to court Jeremy Hunt as one of my supportive witnesses, a former Health Minister, Sir Norman Lamb, and two consultant anaesthetists, explaining with me in no uncertain terms how the press and Parliament, a load of local MPs, were misled when they were told that cost threats were not used as leverage to settle my case, and that the case was not about ICU. And their response during the hearing, one of the directors, was to destroy 90,000 emails of undisclosed material, admit to it in a statement, and then, without medical evidence, suggest mental health would be a credible reason not to attend for cross-examination. And I don't know what's more surprising, all I've just said then, or the fact the judge brought it. And the NHS won that case, which is astonishing. And that is basically where we are now. We're yet more public money being spent on litigation, this time an appeal, to say something basic. And I kid you not, the appeal is as simple as you can't destroy 90,000 emails during a hearing and expect the judgment to be credible if the judge ignores it. It couldn't be more simple. And I'll bring this into land.
Yeah, I've let you go over,
Yeah.
but I wanted to hear how it
But this is the landing point here is where what Georgina says. We cannot tolerate as a nation this dysfunctional Public Interest Disclosure Act, because what I've just described to you, I'm sure is unique in a lot of ways, but it's going on all over the country in various forms and has to stop. And we need to put polite pressure on our MPs to change this law and to see the urgency of doing so, which Dawn Butler is someone to be applauded because she's arranged this meeting, so I'm not having a go at you.
As you can probably tell, I wasn't born in Britain. I was born and raised in Russia. And for a long time, my generation believed in what we called a theory of small deeds. And the idea was that instead of trying to change the system, because that felt impossible, we should focus on what we could control. And we built NGOs, charities, ethical startups, and we told ourselves that if we couldn't fix the big picture, at least we could do some good on the margins of it. And we all know how that ended. While we were busy with our small deeds, Russia became a dictatorship, and NGOs were labeled foreign agents, and protesters were arrested, and those who fought hardest were exiled or killed. And small deeds don't stand a chance against systemic oppression. So when we talk about whistleblowing, I come at it with this lesson in mind. Small actions weren't enough to hold back a dictatorship. And they're not enough to hold corporations and governments accountable either. I was a creative partner at a top ad agency here in London. And very naively, I thought that my clients needed to know that their ads could be greenwashing. And you can guess how that went. So before taking my agency to the employment tribunal, I had to think long and hard, because we all know these stories. A whistleblower on their own doesn't change the system and pays a very high price. It's a very simple cycle. I spoke out, I lost my job, now I'm drowning in legal fees. And for what? To confirm what we already know, that governments spy, that corporations lie, that sustainability is just marketing. And for the people who blow the whistle, the costs are enormous, financially, emotionally, professionally, and even if they win, the compensation never covers the costs, the damage done to their careers, to their reputations, to their mental health. We love whistleblowers in theory, as long as they don't ask us to share the risks. The moment they need real support, money, protection, legal infrastructure, they become inconvenient. Every single insurer tells you to take a reasonable settlement offer, which means that you have to sign an NDA. And if you want a public hearing for moral reasons, you have to pay for it yourself. And so-called activist law firms asked me to sign a full damages commitment just to take my case on top of the 90K they'd bill me pre-trial, the same rates non-activist law firms charge corporations who greenwash and make millions. So there is a giant paywall for justice in the UK, easily over 100K for a case like mine. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed, to keep truth locked behind a price tag. I was very privileged. I had savings, connections, qualified therapy, and even then it was exhausting. 6 months of knocking on doors, knowing that if I failed, it wouldn't be because I was wrong, it would be because I ran out of money. So I was a foreigner and I didn't know how the system functioned. And my first point of contact was climate whistleblowers who connected me with Protect UK, and also found a brilliant junior barrister, Finian Clark of Doughty Street Chambers, who is here, who generously offered to work pro bono. But one junior barrister alone against a corporation's legal army is a suicide mission. He needed support, he needed an experienced solicitor, and a silk to lead him. So I reached out to NGOs, Greenpeace, Blue Marine Foundation, Law for Change, Environmental Funders Network. They all chipped in, but that wasn't enough. And then I met Lawrence at Equal Justice, who, again, very generously offered to cap his fees, and Good Law Project, who offered to help raise additional funds for legal costs. And that's how finally the case started looking possible. I was a creative partner at a famous ad agency, but what is a junior creative supposed to do? What is a nurse at NHS supposed to do? A factory worker who sees illegal pollution? Someone without my connections, without my savings? They don't have 6 months to look for funding. They don't have the ability to campaign for their own legal fees while surviving the fallout of speaking out. Whistleblowers don't need applause. They need backup. A system that fights for them so they don't fight alone. Small deeds aren't enough. I've learned it in Russia, and I'm seeing it again now. If we're trying to end systemic harm, we need systemic resistance. Infrastructure, funding, legal protection. Without it, whistleblowers aren't a threat to the system, they're just a cost of doing business, a tax-deductible annoyance. Corporations settle and don't change. Governments deny and stay in power. The news cycle moves on. The worst thing we can do is to turn whistleblowers into a purely individual moral act, something about personal courage. That makes it easy to dismiss, easy to attack, Oh, look, that climate whistleblower just put a yogurt tuppence in the black bean. Guess they were faking it all along. Look, they're drinking from a plastic cup. So one by one, they burn out until there is no one left to sound the alarm. And without this real systemic support, the system will do what it always does: absorb every scandal, every voice, every warning forever, until there is no livable planet left. Thank you very much.
Very powerful, thank you.
But okay, this is going to be a bit like a Hollywood film. You know, you have a sort of optimistic beginning, then you fall into a pit of despair, and then I'm going to give you a happy ending. All right? So they've been trying to depress you. I'm going to destroy you. So we've had whistleblowing protection since ancient Greek times. Yeah, you had a right to speak freely, and the right not to be retaliated against for that. Okay, if that right was restricted to men, but the idea of it was there even then. We didn't have that right in this country until 1998, the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Okay, you make a protected disclosure, which is disclosure of information about unlawful activity. You're protected, aren't you, in theory, against retaliation and dismissal. It doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose, and I agree with Paulina, it's probably been designed that way. Yeah? It's the same as the equality legislation. You have cosmetic rights that are largely unenforceable. Okay? All right, so in theory, whistleblowers are good. They help the social good, they prevent fraud, they bring criminality and corruption to our attention and allow us to address it. So we should be applauding whistleblowers, and I'm about to suggest we do that in a minute. I've run over 4,000 cases over the last 20 years. I've done a lot of the major whistleblowing cases. I've got 4 of the top 25 awards in the UK. Okay? I'm telling you, from 20 years' experience, the present system does not work. It doesn't work. Okay? So what have I been involved in? The Baby P whistleblower, I don't know if you remember that one. Sharon Shoesmith, blood on her hands. The one I can't talk to you about, which I'm just careful about red light, the 9/11 whistleblower, that's a very interesting story for an off-camera chat. And for one against the CIA, which I can talk to you a little bit about, sexual harassment case. Sexual harassment is about to be redefined or added to the Employment Rights Act under the Employment Rights Bill as a protected disclosure. It's already protected under the Equality Act, so it probably won't make too much difference. But we did a sexual harassment case against the United States of America. We won that case and became the first law firm to beat the United States of America in court, because normally they settle if they think they're going to lose. But 6 months afterwards, my client rang me up and said, look, I'm unemployed, my career's over, the wrongdoer, he's been promoted, and I feel like I've lost. Yeah? And that's the reality of a present system. We'll come on to some stats in a minute, but there's a lot of structural stats which are really going to worry you. All right, but just before I do that, for all the whistleblowers who do stand up, they're all heroes. I think with Chris, Paulina, Nigel, they should all get a round of applause, really. Okay. So as lawyers, we tend to look at things case by case. I can tell you as a lawyer, the justice system does not work in relation to whistleblowers. I can tell you that the law that provides protection does not work, needs to be abolished, rewritten. I can tell you that the lawyers, sadly, who work within that space, are not helping you by charging people on a hour-by-hour, pay-as-you-go basis. Because too many people get costed out of justice. Lawyers should probably, and I'll probably get shot for this, lawyers should be obliged to operate on a fixed cost basis. They tell you, like, the whole case costs 30,000, the whole case costs 5,000. Even if they spend $500,000 of their time on it, that's all they should be allowed to charge. Yeah? That should come in. It will never happen, but it should come in. Right, so the structural issues. Okay, so here's the facts. Only 1% of the people who see unlawful activities report it. 1%. So 99% of people who see unlawful activities do not report it, which means 99% of corruption and lawful acts within employers are not challenged. So that shows the system doesn't work. So that's point number one, which is why we need a system. And the reason we don't challenge it is fear of retaliation or loss of employment, the high costs of bringing that, both in terms of your career and the legal costs, and the low awards. There's a negative cost benefit. By the way, everything I'm saying is in this black book that I've given you, so if you get bored, just read the booklet later. So only 1% complain. Of those who do complain, 40% told Protect on their helpline that they were ignored. But remember, most people don't ring the Protect helpline, so really, everyone gets ignored. If you're then retaliated against, which you have a 99% chance of retaliation, and you bring a grievance for that retaliation, you have a 99% chance of losing that grievance. Why does nobody ever win a grievance for whistleblowing detriment? Any idea? Because if the employer admitted to it, they couldn't defend the case in the tribunal. So the whole system's broken. No one ever wins a grievance for discrimination or whistleblowing, unless you work for an inclusive employer, where you do actually, and it's 5% of employers. But you wouldn't be in that situation if you work for an inclusive or just employer. So this is the structural problem. Only 1% use it, and only 4% win when they do. So you've got a 96% chance of losing a whistleblowing case if you have the courage to stand up, and if you're not financially destroyed by it. So most whistleblowers, and I've spoken to most of the guys who won 6 or 7 figure awards, would never do it again. They would never whistleblow again. Matthew's a good example, who I met one of Georgina's conferences years ago at Cambridge. He won 1.2 million. So I went over and said, well, congrats. And he said, well, not really. After tax, I get 600K. My lawyers charged 800K. I'm being chased for 200K of debt by my lawyers. I've never operated again since. I can't work in the NHS. I could have saved hundreds of lives of children by being a cardiologist and just getting on my job and keeping my head down. That's the system we've created for whistleblowers. It doesn't protect, it persecutes a whistleblower. Okay? So how do we do something about that? It's a structural problem. So we have lots of structural problems within employment law because employment law has been designed to really allow the economy to flow without too much cost or interruption. Classic example, equal pay. Okay, this is a slightly different subject. Women are paid 18% less than men. Does everyone know that? Yeah? So the Birmingham City Council case, 200 women, cooks, cleaners and carers sued for equal pay. How much were they awarded? Any idea? £1,200 million. 1.2 billion. 200 women who worked in Birmingham City Council. Birmingham City Council had to sell off all their property, including the National Exhibition Centre. They had to borrow 300 million from the government to avoid going bankrupt. Total equal pay debt owed to women presently is £1 trillion. 1 trillion. For black workers, the equal pay difference is 26%. Black workers in this country are owed 300 billion in equal pay. Now, if you look at it in another way, that's £1 trillion of profit, i.e. costs not incurred, that employers have made, or 300 billion in relation to black workers. That's why the system doesn't change, because the awards are so pitifully low, there's no financial disincentive not to persecute a whistleblower, yeah? So the system's set up. Now, there is an alternative, and this is the solution. So that's all the grim stuff. Don't whistleblow because it's going to destroy you. Most people don't. Financially, if you're asked for financial advice on it, the answer is just do the deal. But then everything gets subject to an NDA or gets swept under the carpet. So in America, they have something called punitive damages. The whistleblowers get 10 to 15% of what the regulator recovers. Cheryl Eckhard, she worked for GlaxoSmithKline Beecham, or GSK. She saw that the drug they were producing was killing and injuring people. Yeah? She was head of development. She whistleblew about it. How much was she awarded for that? Any idea? $96 million. Okay? The lawyers out there are on 10%, so the lawyer made 9.6 million. I met him at Cambridge. He had a very beautiful suit, not Marks and Spencer's, yeah? Really nicely tailored. Very elegant man. Spoke very well. So I said, look, if Cheryl had whistleblown in the UK, had the same job, same pay, 150,000 a year, caused the same damage to British people as has been caused to Americans, if she had won, and she had a 4% chance of winning in the UK, she would have got $200,000. Would she have whistleblown about the same situation, same health and safety problem in the UK? His response, hell no. There's no way she would do that. She's destroyed in the pharmaceutical industry. He said, quote unquote, $96 million was the least she should have expected for that. That's why the British system doesn't work. Now, so we need punitive damages. In Britain, we do have punitive damages, but what have the court said about it? If we award more than £20,000 in punitives, it will bring the British law into disrepute. Punitive damages are not British, because British people stand up and do the right thing because we're noble people. We don't need financial incentives. What a load of rubbish. Okay? If 99% of people don't stand up, that argument just doesn't work, does it? All right? But even in America, where GSK had to pay out 96 million, they made over 500 million on that drug. So they're still 400 million ahead. Yeah? And now they're just being sued, you'll see, in May 24 for another billion for doing the same thing with a drug that gives people cancer, allegedly. So the profit, the need to make profit, the desire to make profit, overwhelms and destroys whistleblowers in the employment. Okay, so we need punitive damages, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have them. And the SFO, Nick, was it Fgrave? Yeah, ex-Met, he's head of SFO. He said whistleblowers do need financial incentives. He says, in the UK, only 5% of fraud cases are brought about because of whistleblowers. In America, what percentage is it? Any idea? 86%. 86% of all corporate fraud cases in America are based on whistleblower testimony. That's the difference. We lose £190 billion every year to corporate fraud. That's the same cost of funding the whole of the NHS for the year. We could have 2 NHSs if we could recover that money. The £1 trillion owed to women, that can also be recovered, but it's not going to happen because of structural problems. So, Office of a Whistleblower, which Georgina's spearheading, great idea. Okay? It will help. But it's got to be an effective commission, not like the Equality and Human Rights Commission, that was supposed to be independent, but Liz Truss in December 20 appointed 4 new commissioners and a chair to that commission so that they would carry out, in quotes, the government's agenda. That was totally illegal and should have been judicially reviewed, and it's killed that organisation. The most senior race advisor who I acted for of the Equality and Human Rights Commission was instructed never to make a finding of institutional racism, even if the evidence was there for it, because their payers, the government, did not think that term was helpful. Yeah, they weaponised it, and the Labour government has inherited it, so they should shut it down. So the Office of Whistleblower needs to be properly funded. There needs to be a separate litigation fund, so the cost of fighting the cases is not borne by the whistleblower. Commission has to be properly funded. There needs to be, well, punitive damages. That's more political. Because without that commission leading and funding, we have the same system where only 1% take up those rights. Anyway, so hopefully that's a happy ending if we get punitive damages and an effective Office for Whistleblower.